time for Voice of Indie. Your hosts today are Beem author, producer, and marketing monster for independent multimedia publisher Fresh Ink Group, and Stephen Gies, author, producer, composer, and publisher for Fresh Ink Group.
And good evening, and welcome to another episode of the Voice of Indie podcast, brought to you by FreshInkGroup.com. And I am your host tonight, Beem Weeks, and with me, as usual, I see over there in the corner is Stephen Gies. How you doing tonight, Stephen?
Oh, I'm fair to middling. How about you?
I'm middling to fair. I can't complain.
Okay. We want to remind our listeners that we do take live calls. This is a live show, so if you want to jot down the phone number, 516-453-9902. That's 516-453-9902. We would love to hear from you during today's show.
And you can also join in on Twitter if you don't have access to your phone right now. Use the hashtag FreshInkGroup. That's hashtag FreshInkGroup, and you can leave your questions or your comments for tonight's guest.
You could leave a funny picture, too, if you want. Also want to remind our listeners that after this show is over, you can listen to it anytime, day or night, 24/7, over and over it again, and you can share it with people by going to FreshInkGroup.com, clicking on the podcast tab, or going to YouTube and searching the Fresh Ink Group channel. Or you can go to Beem's website, beemweeks.com, or my website, stephengies.com.
Yes, you can. Growing up in Southern California, Gwen Plano loved learning, and she loved imagining stories, some grandly epic, all personal and heartfelt. She taught and served in universities across the United States and in Japan, then retired and focused again on her stories. Her first book, Letting Go into Perfect Love, is an award-winning memoir recounting some of her struggles in life while providing insight into the healing process. Gwen shifted to fiction after this first book and joined forces with acclaimed author John W. Howell in writing a thriller, The Contract Between Heaven and Earth. Its sequel, The Choice, The Unexpected Heroes, soon followed, this time a solo effort. The culmination, A New Beginning, is the third book of the series. Gwen lives in the Midwest with her husband, traveling and writing, sharing those stories only she can imagine. And if you would like to learn more, you can find out at gwenplano.com. Once again, that is gwenplano.com. And with that, welcome to the show, Gwen. It's really good to have you here with us.
Well, my goodness, I find it such a privilege to be with both of you. And so thank you for inviting me. I look forward to this conversation.
Well, we have been looking forward to having you on the show for a while. So, welcome.
Yes, the pleasure is definitely ours. You're helping us up our game, Gwen.
Yes.
I don't know about that, but I'm glad to be here.
We heard a little bit about you with your bio, so let's talk a little bit more about Gwen the person before we get into Gwen the author and your books. Southern California, that's one of my favorite places in the United States. What was it like growing up in Southern California with the sand dunes and the chocolate mountains and whatnot?
I'm so glad you mentioned that part, because when people hear the words, Southern California, immediately I think people imagine beaches. But I grew up on a farm at that southernmost point of California. So if our listeners would envision the map of California and see the border of Arizona and then also the border of Mexico, at the point that the two states and Mexico touch, that one place, that is exactly where I grew up, and it's called Imperial Valley. So I grew up, as you mentioned, by the desert, a huge, great desert, full of all of those things that terrify people, like scorpions and rattlesnakes and, tarantulas. All of those are very familiar to me. And as well, earthquakes and unusual phenomena All of that was part of my life. But if we want to talk about who I was, I think a little bit of a glimpse of where I grew up, how I grew up, might give our listeners a better understanding of who I am. Shall I share a bit of that?
I'd love to hear it.
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, and the reason I want to do this is because it's a bit different than perhaps the majority of people. Because most people don't look out their house and see sand dunes, but I grew up that way, sand dunes. And not only sand dunes, but fields of hundreds of miles of cotton and wheat and barley and sugar beets. This was the world in which I lived. The nearest human being, other than our household, was a mile away, and I didn't even know those people. So we really were like an enclave, a little city unto its own, except for the bus that would pick up the children every day for school and drive us 2 hours, and this is the truth, 2 hours because it drove up and down all of those farm roads to pick up the stray children just like us. So I am the eldest of 7 children. And having said that, I was also the one who took care of the family when Mom was having babies, which was frequent. So even at 1 year old, I began helping to take care of a baby. There was always one. And so I never really liked dolls. It's like they didn't move like all the babies that I was taking care of. So
well, if they did move,
else,
I think that'd be kind of a whole different life there.
Well, they sometimes smell better.
Yeah, well, I loved my little brothers and sisters, but I always had one, holding one, taking them, dressing them, doing everything. So I never played with dolls. But around 5 years old, I learned to cook meals, and I did for a family, even though I couldn't read. And around 11, Dad taught me how to use a stick shift and drive around the farm, which I did. And his words were almost prophetic because he said, you never know, Gwen. Someday you may need to use this skill, and you'll know what to do. Well, at 12 years old, I had to drive my mom 15 miles into town to the hospital. She was having her 8th baby. Child did not survive, but I had to get her there. No one else was available. Dad was in the field somewhere, and this is way before cell phones. So I had to get Mom to the hospital. I want you to know there were no car crashes or anything. I was very successful. Mom got there, and she was well. So our home was a very simple one, as most farm homes are. So we had one room for the boys, one for the girls, and one for Mom and Dad. We were never hungry, even though our meals were simple. So our life in general on the farm was just a calm experience, but it was I use the word simple, but really that's what it was. It's working. You had expectations. You gathered the eggs. You took care of the chickens, feeding them. You fed the horses. You took care of the animals and our multiple dogs. You were always busy. But for me, I was a dreamer. I still am, actually. And around the farm, as I said, there are all these fields. And the fields are divided up basically a half mile by half mile. And what I would do is walk around the larger complex, which meant I walked 2 miles. As I did, I created all kinds of worlds. And not just dreaming up odd creatures or anything like that, but I dream of traveling. I really wanted to travel. I wanted to see things. I wanted to know people. And so I would dream. I would go and dream, and then I would scribble things on notes. And so Mom, she went out and bought me a diary, which was very sweet of her. So it wasn't a matter of using a diary like people usually do, like, well, today I did blah, blah. Because if I did that, every day would be the same. Well, I collected the eggs, It would not be my dreams. So my diary really came down to writing about ideas. And that spurred me on immensely and gave me life, really, because I was also a child who, though busy with our normal things of life, I would be always thinking about other possibilities. And when I came of age, I wanted to go to college. Now, my dad didn't think that was the best idea, because what is a girl going to do with an education? After all, she's just going to get married. That's exactly what my dad said. And I said, well, I know it's true. And I protested. And I said, well, no, it's all not fair that I don't get to go. Well, anyway, in the end, he conceded. And I decided I was going to go as far away to school as I could, which to me meant San Francisco. So I went up there and fell in love with the city. But I have to tell you, it was an immense cultural shock, and not for the reasons you might imagine. The cultural shock came when my roommates arrived. Now, I had taken a bus down from the desert, imagine this, with Greyhound all the way, and then had my one little suitcase, my one pair of shoes, and then my roommates arrived with multiple suitcases of mounds of clothes and dozens of shoes. I had never, ever seen anything like it, ever. So here I am staring at this expanse, thinking, oh my gosh, I don't fit in here. I have my shoes and I'm wearing them. But it quickly passed. This sense of culture shock passed. Probably my roommates loved me especially closely because they had more space in the closet. I just didn't need much. But there was no sense, or if there was, I didn't feel it, of being somehow not as good as other people. But I carried with me the whole experience of the farm. Just that simplicity, as well as that sort of romantic notion of life, that there's all these possibilities out there. So that's kind of it when I first started to go to school. And I wanted to mention that part because it's a kind of patterning that's in my life even today, and I think it finds expression in my writing.
Speaking of your writing, you had talked about, getting this diary and creating these worlds and whatnot. Do you still have some of those writings that you had as a younger person?
Well, what I do have is my diary morphed into journals, and I collected my journals. I don't know why. I couldn't throw them away, my journals, because
they're history. You don't want to throw them away.
Yes. Now, some I've sorted through, some. But anyway, I kept all of those journals, and that really was a recording of not only my thoughts to perhaps my deeper self, that could be, but really kind of prayers, kind of exchanges with what I understood as divine. And it's all captured there. So when you read it, it's, when I read it, it's kind of a chronicle of an evolving sense of self, is really what it is. So they're precious in that way, but they're also the foundation of my first book.
Okay. Great. Now, from San Francisco, you did manage to achieve your dream of traveling and living in different places too. From there, you went to Purdue. You've lived on the East Coast. You visited Europe. One of the things that fascinates me especially is your time in Japan. What is it that led you to Japan?
Well, that was an interesting one. While at Purdue, my former spouse and I went to a presentation which was by a Zen master. He was a very kindly man and led the whole group in meditation, but also explained what Zen is in terms of a practice of quieting the mind. And my former really wanted to go to Japan to work with him directly. And so we did. I mean, after all, you're talking 1970. This is the kind of thing young people did back then, and to my parents' dismay. But nevertheless, we did. I had my eldest son at the time was like 2. So here I go, baby in hand, and we head off to Japan. And we supported ourselves by teaching English as a second language. I studied the Japanese language, but I can tell you that is a difficult language, and I'm not proficient at all. I barely can use a few words. But I did study tea ceremony, chao no yu. I studied calligraphy, flower arrangement, ikebana, and we traveled the country. So it's a beautiful country, very rich in history and in the arts. And finally, my daughter was born there. So we lived in 3 different areas, Niigata, Kyoto, and Kamakura. But the highlight was the birth of my daughter. She was born right there with all of the other little Japanese babies because we didn't go to a specialty hospital. And she had the attention of everyone in the area because it turns out that Westerners have a noticeable nose. And they were fascinated because little Japanese babies really don't. So it was a beautiful experience to actually be in another culture and to have a baby and to know the people in that way. You are one of them. You've given birth. And the ladies in the little area we were living in were all coming to make sure I was okay and giving me instructions what I needed to do, all those kinds of things. It was a lovely introduction into the culture.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Now, you grew close to some missionaries there and even did some missionary work yourself. What was that like?
Well, the English-speaking population in Japan at the time were really the missionaries. And I became friends pretty quickly with them. They would come by the house and not to press anything at all. But one of them had actually given me a New Testament, and I read it intensely because I didn't have one with me. And it was an extraordinary experience for me. And then I began spending a considerable time with the missionaries and learned a great deal from them. So and with that, we met folks who wanted us to return and get some background in theology and then to return to Japan as missionaries ourselves. So eventually we did. After 5 years in Japan, we returned to the United States, and that is where, at the seminary, that I actually earned a master's degree in theology. It was the most incredible experience because I'd always wanted to know more about Scripture, always wanted to know more about how people understand the divine. And one of the teachers, the most powerful teachers I had, was a Jewish rabbi, and he taught the teachings of Jesus.
Wow.
I know. It was extraordinary because he situated the New Testament, basically, at least the Gospels, within the context of the Jewish world. And he spoke to us about how radical what Jesus was doing, just how radical of a person he was, how he treated women, for example, how he interacted with those who were outcasts, the ways in which he valued things, which wasn't money, it was rather matters of the heart. So it was an extraordinary class. I've thought back to that practically daily because he opened my eyes like no one had at the time. So anyway, we studied there and then returned. It was, and by the way, then ended up having 2 more children, little boys. So.
That's terrific. We are listening to Gwen M. Plano on the Voice of Indy podcast, sponsored by Fresh Ink Group. And we've got a couple of comments and questions over on Twitter. I'll take the first one, Beem, from Verwayne Greenhoe. He's posted a picture of a bunch of turtles lined up on a log. And he says, everyone in my neighborhood is gathered on the log to listen to Gwen's story.
Well,
yeah, that's a nice picture.
Thank you.
And then we have a question from Robert Williscroft. You want to read that, Beem?
Yeah. Robert Williscroft. He's another author. He asks, how far are you from Holtville, Hot Springs do you live?
Not far at all. My parents, I was probably 15 minutes. So that gives you an idea.
Wow. I've never been there. That doesn't sound familiar to me. Sounds beautiful, though.
Well,
yeah.
I don't know if I'd use beautiful as a descriptive, but it's very dear to my heart. Well, usually when people talk beautiful, they're talking trees, and, well, you're not going to see a lot of trees.
Yeah, that's true.
You're talking elevations, and you don't, it's flat there. But it has its own beauty, trust me. The desert itself is magnificent. And the farmland that surrounds it, if you're flying over the area, what you see is really not just the fields of cotton, wheat, and barley. You see a patchwork. You see a quilt. And that is elegant. All different shades of colors, mostly greens. It's just beautiful. So there is that beauty, but it isn't the beauty that people normally associate with, like, well, a lovely lake or the ocean or the forests, or it's not that. It's a different kind of beauty.
It's the kind of beauty that shimmers.
Yeah, and you can find beauty in the sands of Egypt. At least I do.
That's right.
With the pyramids and all that stuff. I mean, there's even beauty in that. Now, you've talked about living out in California and then going to Japan. Now, when you came back, you lived in New York and spent quite a bit of time on the East Coast. What were your experiences there in New York and on the East Coast?
Well, I was involved in New York and in Connecticut at universities. So I was teaching, first of all, but then that quickly moved to administration. So what that is I was a vice president of student services. And most people, when they think the universities, they think of the classes, because they rightly should, because that is what people are going to a university or a college. That's why they're going there, is to take classes. But there's a whole other world that's outside of the classroom, and that other world is what I was in charge of. So really what it comes down to is things like the counseling department, financial aid, the health center, the career services. If it's a residential university, then it fell under my responsibility. And one of the big areas, to be frank, was discipline. So if you're in a residential university, which I was when I was in Connecticut, well, when I was the whole time was residential, then you're dealing with young people between 18, 21, 22. You put enough of kids together, they're going to have parties, and there are going to be plenty who are underage, and that is where the dominant number of discipline cases came from, was right there.
I can imagine.
It really, now you have people who go into excess, and then you have other problems. So I did see some serious cases, but most of it were, people with fake IDs trying to get a beer. So, that's not exactly the end of the world.
Yeah.
So from there, you wound up back in Southern California again. This time, Irvine, and finally settled in the middle of the country. What's it like where you are now?
Well, correct. I moved back to California and served there. I want to mention one thing about California, because when I went back and was in the Irvine area, some of you know that the Marine base is not far from there, and that's Camp Pendleton. Well, when the young men, and it was mostly men, there had some women, but most of the men, when they returned from Afghanistan or wherever their assignment might be, often they wanted to go to college. So this area of supporting the veterans also fell to my responsibility, and there was no space on campus for them. So I want you to know what I did, and it was a gift for me more than them. My office happened to be very big, so what I did is there was a small space in the back. I used that as my office, and I turned the rest of it over to the veterans. So set up computers for them, set up a space where they could hang out and meet, set up areas where they could study. These guys, I keep a picture of them in front of me because I fell in love with them all as though they were my own kids. And that's the thing. They're not kids because they've already gone through hell and back and came back shouldering what they went through. And by the way, just let me say a quick thank you to all of our veterans, because today's Veterans Day. But through the process of working with these young men and women, my heart opened tremendously. How incredible for these young of their lives. Many of them were injured. So their courage and determination shaped even my next steps. So you asked from California. I just had to put in that pitch because these vets mean the world to me, and I ended up contacting elected officials and everything because I was rather ticked off by how they were not being attended to or supported as they should have. And slowly changes came about. I won't say it's perfect now, but there were changes, which is heartening for me. So, okay, I did that. And then you said...
Now you're in Missouri.
Oh, I'm in Missouri, yes.
Branson.
Yes, Branson. All right. So how did I get here? Larry and I were going to retire. He retired first from IBM, and then I retired soon after that, a couple years afterwards. And we needed to find out where we would live, because California, as beautiful as it is, and even though many of my family live in the area, is very expensive. And some of my relatives said, you need to go check out Branson. Well, we never heard of it, ever, neither of us. And neither of us had ever traveled to Missouri. So we decided, okay, we'll do it, we'll go, and not expecting one thing. But we came, we thought, well, this is really pretty. Table Rock Lake, it's extraordinary. And we started looking around the area, fell in love with it. The Ozark Mountains that run through are just beautiful, magnificent. Homes are about half the price of California. cost of living is, I don't know, but it's definitely at least half the cost on that too. So we then decided to come back during each of the seasons, which we did, just to see what it would be like during the seasons. And we fell in love with the place, found a home that actually looks down over the lake, surrounded by trees and vegetation, just beautiful. One of our walks, actually, a cub bear ran past, and I was so shocked I didn't even know what kind of animal it was at first. I said, "What is that?" And then I realized it was a bear, and I thought, "Oh my gosh, we got to get out of here," because I know Mama was somewhere by, and I
Very
didn't
close.
want to meet her. So anyway, lot of wildlife. Deer are every day coming through the yard, but there are foxes, and I have a favorite turtle that likes our yard. But there are other creatures too. It's a much slower pace of life and utterly beautiful. So
I love that area.
yes, beautiful.
So you and Larry, are you two peas in a pod, or do you complement each other?
I think we complement each other. Where Larry has a very structured way of seeing, it's A goes to B, to goes to C, go to D. Well, my mind, I wish it did that. I wish my mind went that way, but it does not. Mine goes A, oh, X is right there. I see it. I get it. And it will travel just like it did when I was a kid. So, and it moves quickly. The other thing with my way of seeing, and this has been the way since I was a child, is I'm very strongly empathic. And when I see someone, I experience them. And I don't know how else to say that. I experience them. And so I experience them inside of me. So if they're struggling, I know they're struggling. And then I instinctively want to reach out in some way. Now, if I don't see them and simply hear them, I intuit, but that's a little different experience than if I see. So if I go into a large gathering, that can be overwhelming because I end up experiencing every person there that I meet. It's just the way it is. Now I will say with Larry, it's kind of cute because he is literal in how he understands things. So if somebody says whatever it is, then that is what is. And if somebody says to me, well, yeah, I'm fine. Well, I already know he's not fine. I already know there's more going on. And then if I see the person, I probably experience at least the feeling part of what's going on. That's just me. So we do complement each other a lot because I love it that he's so logical. And he is perpetually surprised that I understand things that he doesn't know how in the heck that happened. It's funny.
Well, he sounds like a terrific guy, and we also want to give him a shout out for Veterans Day too, since he is a Navy veteran.
Yes,
thank you for your service. And now, switching gears a little bit, Gwen, how are you spending this time during this pandemic? What are you doing to occupy your I guess your mind? So, because a lot of people are getting stir crazy and whatnot. So how are you spending this time?
Well, I have been writing, and of course now the book is just getting launched, and so that's taken some time for me for sure, because a good part of the time has been spent finishing the book, and then actually John Howell, I just mentioned this with you, he so kindly read it and critiqued, and he was invaluable, I'll tell you, in helping me. And then off to Harmony Kent and her expert advice at editing. So I'm greatly indebted to both of them. But so the time has been spent in book-related activities. And it's amazing just how many things need to get in place for a book to finally reach the press. And now besides that, our area is such that I can go out and walk freely. And if I do come across a person, which is not that common, but if I did, it's easy to keep an easy, 6 feet, even 12 feet. Very simple. So I can go out and walk, enjoy life in absolute beauty.
Wow, that's wonderful. Now, during this time, you've also been dealing with a medical challenge?
Oh, yes. In February, I had to have neurosurgery, which was an immense blessing. But by the time I finished that in February, that's when COVID started. So it was very lucky. I had immediately changed our flight plans to make sure that got home before everybody was quarantined. And then just a couple weeks ago, I had another surgery, which was just fine. Again, during COVID. And I thought, well, what better time, really, because can't do a heck of a lot, so might as well be in recovery and handling things there. But both surgeries successful and kind of miraculous. So thank you for asking, but I'm doing fine.
Well, you definitely have our best wishes. We're rooting for you.
Thank you.
I've known you for quite a number of years now through various internet connections and whatnot, and you're known for really supporting others, supporting writers, and you usually read and review, and your reviews are just they're wonderful because if there's a critique, you point it out, but you encourage. Where does this aspect come from? Being so, is this something from helping raise your siblings? Is this like an ingrained kind of thing? Because it's almost like that motherly thing. You've reviewed some of my work, and it's like they're some of my favorite reviews, and I'm always humbled when I read your words.
Well, I say this very honestly, Beem. You're one of the best writers I've ever read. And I've said that to you, but I don't say it lightly. You just are an extraordinary writer. But
thank you.
With me, I mean it sincerely.
Well, I wasn't fishing for a compliment, but I'll take it.
Where I think this comes from, it goes back to how I grew up. My parents would never allow us to criticize others, ever. Would not allow it. Now, part of that comes from the fact that my dad, during the Great Depression, was living in Oklahoma. He grew up there, and they were itinerates. They had nothing. They lived in a tent. 2 of the kids actually died. So he knew the worst of poverty and also knew people's criticisms because they had nothing, truly. So my dad was very sensitive to ever hearing anyone be critical of anyone. In fact, he would not accept it. That is when he would get angry at us. And Mother would repeatedly say, if you can't say something good, don't say it at all. And she meant it, even though that's, a quote from something, but it's something people are very familiar with that line. But in our household, it meant it. Now, when I read somebody's work, this is sound awful, but it's not that I'm necessarily reading for the story. The story is the plus. The story is something that might spur me to think this way or that way. I'm reading for the author. I wasn't initially aware of why I read as I do, but it makes sense because of how I see people. So when I start reading, I instinctively am looking for the writer. Where is he or she? And once I find them, and it can just be a little phrase, and I know that's them. That's who they are. They're the person who is concerned about this or that, or has this very tender heart that shows it through this or that. Anyway, once I find the writer, it's like everything changes for me. Then I read from a different vantage point. I'm accompanying the writer. I'm with them as they're writing. I'm seeing a world that they're creating. So, Beem, I did that with you too, but I do these things instinctively. It's not like I'm plotting or something. I don't do that. But somehow I move into that space. And so, yeah, in some people's writings, you can see where there's a typo or there's something. Well, I don't frankly care. I'm not reading for the typos. I'm not reading because they didn't put a comma there or they didn't capitalize this, or I don't care. I'm actually reading to find the person, and the story highlights that person because the story is part of them. And so it's an organic kind of experience that I have. Now, when I write reviews, I realize some people do these beautiful long reviews, and they really rewrite the story in a paragraph or two, and they're just elegant. I usually don't write that. I can sometimes, but I usually don't. What I usually write is something more akin to how I experienced it. It's a different approach. It's my approach, and
it's a very unique approach, definitely.
Very.
It's a different, but it's just me. That's how I do it. So anyway, I do read a little differently than perhaps some, and it's too important. If I meet the author through their work, you can trust I'm going to be reading them again. It's unless I can't imagine not liking them. So if I read them, if I meet them, then I want to know more, and then I'm going to read their work. That's how it goes. So I don't know.
Great. We're talking to Gwen M. Plano on the Voice of Indie podcast. And Beem, you got a couple of comments over on Twitter.
Okay. Yeah. I see. All right. So Robert Willis Croft says, bravo, Zulu, for your veterans work in SoCal. I'm a retired submariner and definitely appreciate your attitude toward veterans. Yes, indeed. And I take a moment to shout out to the vets, to the veterans. Happy Veterans Day to the veterans, to the active duty, and to the first responders. You are appreciated, 100%. And Verwayne Greenhoe, he threw in this. Pandemic? Stir crazy? I've always been crazy.
Now, Gwen, you're talking about seeing the person, the writer, in the work. And
yes.
I think that could definitely be said about your first book, Letting Go into Perfect Love, where we really do get to know a lot about Gwen M. Plano. It's a very personal, very poignant book. And I like the way you describe it as a kind of a pathway to showing how to find a place of peace. Can you tell us a little bit about that book?
Oh, sure. I mentioned journals earlier, and they basically kind of kept me alive through a lot of hardships because I could put my focus there into the journal. But I knew I was going to write a book. I knew that for years. And so when it came time, when I had the time to write, I took my journals and put them across the floor in my office and had them chronological, and began reading. Well, it was a little tough going through it, but I will tell you, it was also transformative. And then when I started writing, I realized that every single person, anyone at least who listens to their heart, walks this same path. Our circumstances are different. You know, each one of us have different things that happen to us, or we find ourselves in different hardships. So the book ultimately is not about me, even though I am the example. And I would rather use it that way. It's really about all of us, because every single one of us at some point in time knows despair. Every one of us knows what it is to feel no one loves you, or to feel you aren't worth anything. I mean, there's so much. So this is about all of us. And when I decided to put pen to paper, I knew nothing about the publishing world. I only knew I had to write it. So, in the process of trying to write, I rediscovered that young woman who had been afraid for so many years, and then offered her life, because the process of going through the journal actually led me to a process of forgiveness and of letting go into that perfect love, which I mentioned as is the title. So it's a process of forgiveness, and that's what it was.
This book is is put out by She Writes Publishing, and
That's right.
I'm especially taken by the cover. Can you tell us a little bit about that cover, the story behind it?
Sure. The cover, for those who haven't seen it, is there are angel wings on the cover, and otherwise it's a blue background. I had a pretty rugged experience in which I was strangled, actually, and passed out. When I came to, I felt the wings of an angel wrapped around me. And with that experience, I had a very deep experience of love. It was a kind of love that went from the top of the head to your toes. You were just simply encased in love. I write about that in the book. I will tell you, as much as the whole experience was pretty stunning, I was not mentally in a state of being analytical or anything, but then I became aware of the angel. And my very, very first thought was, and it'll sound bad when I say it, but my very first thought was, oh, they have wings. And this is because I always was questioning, why do angels have wings? I don't see them flopping those wings, you know. So why do angels have wings? Well, in this state in which I was in, there were definitely wings wrapped around me. There was no doubt, and I haven't questioned it since. What I did come out of knowing absolutely is that we are never, ever alone. Not ever.
Oh, I'll say an amen to that.
Yeah, never, ever alone, even though we tend to believe it, but no. So that's why I asked, because of this experience is why when they asked me what I wanted on the cover, I said I want angel's wings.
Now, okay, we're never alone. I mean, even in my darkest moments, that's where I learned that you know, what could have destroyed me didn't. It transformed me and turned me into a different person. Now, let's move from your memoir to the contract series. What led you to go from, you know, something that's a memoir where you're telling, you know, a very heartfelt, true story to writing this incredible fiction?
Well, it's a bit of a funny story, but I will tell you. I kept awaking in the middle of the night, which seems to be my pattern, and I would have a story unfold, and it involved these characters who straddled heaven and earth, And I knew that the story was going to be a thriller, and I didn't know what to do with that. And this is why I wanted to tell you that it's a bit of a funny story how this book got written. So at the time, author John Howell and I worked together on Blog Talk Radio. He was my backup. And I really didn't know him, but while reading his second thriller, which is called His Revenge, I had a flash of insight that I should ask him if he would like to co-author a book with me. Now, I was terrified because he is kind of a strong guy and very direct, and I thought he's going to think I'm some kind of idiot because I'd bring this up. So I had to summon a lot of courage, and I finally asked him if he would be interested even to write this book. And to my total surprise, he basically said, okay. And that was that. It was hilarious, really. But he was a tremendous mentor throughout the whole process. Probably I caused him to pull out volumes of hair, but for the most part, we laughed a lot as we wrote. It was a tremendous experience. And the story itself is a fairly simple one of two souls returning to Earth because of this catastrophic political event which could result in international warfare. So the Divine Council decided that these two souls needed to take this extraordinary measure and intervene on what was going on. So the chosen two sign a contract that they will work together to avert this disaster. And the story follows these two as they face one obstacle after another to complete their contract. And eventually they succumb and then return to heaven. That's a very brief look at the story.
It's a fascinating story, too. And that one's published by John's business, Keewaydin Lane Books. So if you're anybody out there looking for it, Keewaydin Lane Books. Now, at the time that you put that out, that was your co-authoring experience, but you decided to move on from there and try soloing.
I did, but I also want to confess that The Choice, which is the second book in the series, and follows the first and deals with some of the same kind of issues. John worked with me for the first part of that, and then and helped throughout. But he also was in. Yes, but he also actually wanted to go and focus on a different project. So in the end, it was just me, but he had worked with me throughout, so I consider him there at least in the background, egging me on. And of course, as you know so well, drum roll, the publisher of this book was Fresh Ink Group. So thank you both.
You're welcome. And we do have a commercial for that, Beem.
The Choice. Here we go.
Best-selling author Gwen Plano presents The Choice, The Unexpected Heroes, Book 2 in her Heaven and Earth thriller trilogy. In the first book, co-penned by best-selling author John W. Howell, the Earth is threatened with a catastrophic event, and Heaven's leadership intervenes with extraordinary measures to ensure the survival of the planet. Two souls volunteer to return to Earth and take human form as Brad Channing and Sarah O'Brien. The Choice picks up where the first book ends, at an Air Force base in Northern California. The base commander invites Brad's former Navy SEAL instructors to help him determine who is behind two very personal murders. Their deaths are part of a bigger plan, and the commander urgently needs to thwart that plan. Implicated are key Washington, D.C. officials. A confidential team uncovers a treacherous conspiracy that has as its goal world domination. The pressing question is, who can be trusted and who cannot? Grab your copy now of The Choice, The Unexpected Heroes by Gwen Plano. Available worldwide in hardcover, paperback, and all major ebook formats. The Choice is proudly published by Fresh Ink Group.
All right. Now, speaking of The Choice, your book covers are, as Stephen was just talking about, the Letting Go into Perfect Love cover. The covers for these 3 books are quite incredible as well. What's the theme there that you're looking to capture?
Well, one, just that they're related to one another, and we have the same artist involved, which is, and Rosanna White's work is very good.
Excellent.
But I think each one shows an element of the military thriller that each is.
Okay. We do have another comment here on Twitter that I want to get to before we run out of time. And this is from Verwayne Greenhow again. He says, Gwen, you remind me of my father. He never had a bad word about anyone, and he taught me so much. I am enjoying listening to your talk tonight.
Thank you.
Well, then that brings us to the 3rd book in the series, or trilogy, whichever way you want to look at it, The Culmination.
All right. Well, this one definitely is a military thriller. Of all of them, it really hits hard and runs hard. And it really revolves around the threat that exists. And rather than go through all of the elements of it, there is a question I want to answer because it's so strongly military and ends up in the Middle East, in fact, where actually war breaks out. So this is intense. And I want our listeners to realize that I never served in the military, though I have multiple family members who did and turned to them throughout this. But how could I write a book that is a military thriller, and why would I? Those are the kind of questions I would ask of anybody who's doing this, and I want to explain this, that I am a strong researcher and spent endless hours, truly, researching everything related to military matters, deployments, movements of the carrier strike groups, and purchases of more ballistic missiles. I mean, anything you can think of related to military, I covered. I studied. I subscribed to 5 different newspapers, 3 in Washington, D.C., and 2 in New York, specifically for this purpose. So I also had this massive National Geographic map of the Middle East and kept it posted on the wall by my desk, because prior to that map, I could not have identified most of the countries in the area. I can now. So, and I continue to watch the movement. I'm alert to it all. But why would I write it? A simple response is that I wanted to write a sequel, but that's really a meaningless response. I felt compelled to write about what I was seeing, reading, knowing through all the research. Though the story is fiction, I want to tell everyone the armaments, the missiles, the nuclear weapons, the aircraft, the carrier strike groups are very, very real. The threat of war is very, very real. That war is a business. Companies, people profit, but others suffer. It's very real. So the book concludes with an unlikely but possible alliance that could transform this threat. Now I want you to all remember this is fiction. And because it's fiction, all is possible. There's much all of us can do, each of us, if we are to peacefully coexist. And therein lies the reason I had to write this book.
Wow.
It's a fine reason. And we do have a commercial for that one, too.
All right.
Best-selling author Gwen Plano presents The Culmination, A New Beginning, the final book in the Contracts thriller series. In the first book, co-penned by best-selling author John W. Howell, the Earth is threatened with a catastrophic event, and Heaven's leadership intervenes with extraordinary measures to ensure the survival of the planet. In Book 2, The Choice, a confidential team uncovers a traitorous conspiracy that has as its goal world domination. The pressing question is, who can be trusted and who cannot? The culmination, A New Beginning, brings the Contract thriller trilogy to a close. After an assassination attempt on an Air Force base in Northern California, tensions mount. Heads of state meet to craft a denuclearization agreement. The meetings between these nuclear powers take a murderous turn. A nefarious conspiracy reemerges and leads the characters into the heart of the Middle East, where they encounter the unexpected and find a reason for hope. Grab your copy now of The Culmination, A New Beginning by Gwen Plano. Available worldwide in hardcover, paperback, and all major ebook formats. The Culmination is proudly published by Fresh Ink Group.
And is this available now, Gwen?
The Kindle version is available for pre-sale, and the paperback and hardback are available now for sale. I want to thank you guys because you've done an incredible job with all of the, publishing the books, and also for creating this, trailer. I just appreciate it so much.
Well, we like to impress Larry.
He's duly impressed, trust me.
Well, I see we're just about out of time, but where can listeners find you on social media?
Well, if they wanted to go to my website, you would just go to gwenplano.com. So that would be the website. But if you want to go to Twitter, then my handle is GM Plano. And then at Facebook, it's the same handle, really. So you type in for Facebook, and it's capital G, capital M, capital Plano. That's what it is. It's easy.
Yeah, okay.
Well, we want to thank you for coming by today, Gwen. This has been definitely enlightening, a lot of fun, and feel like we're getting to know you a little bit better each time, and that's a wonderful thing.
Well, I have to thank you very much. You guys, I have immense respect for both of you. You're not only just talented and amazing writers, but you're great human beings, and wow, I love it. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us tonight, Gwen. It's like Stephen just said. I mean, it's an honor for us to have you on here with us.
So, listeners, be sure to share this show with everybody you know, and then some. Again, it's over at freshinkgroup.com, and it's also on YouTube, beamweeks.com, stephengs.com.
And we will be back again next Wednesday, same time, same station. And we have Stephen Hargis, I believe, coming up. Stephen?
Yeah, Stephen Hargis. He's an acclaimed sports writer and sports photographer. And he has a book called 8 Hateful Miles, which is a very microcosm look at high school football, the whole football phenomenon and sports in the United States. It's fascinating, full of pictures, and Stephen has a lot of stories to tell about it. So we're looking forward to having Stephen next week.
All right, then we will
Thanks
see you
again,
all
Gwen.
Thank you, Gwen.
Thank you.
And we will see you again next week, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye.
You've been a part of Voice of Indy, a production of Fresh Ink Group. Spread the word, support our guests, then find us at freshinkgroup.com and be sure to hashtag Fresh Ink Group.